And good afternoon again from Geneva. We're coming back on the air at this hour with ABC News live coverage of today's historic summit between President Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin. We are expecting Russian President Putin to take questions at any moment. You can see movement there. Reporters have been waiting in that room, including one of our own, Rachel Scott. The two leaders meeting for several hours today to talk in two rounds. The first round lasting more than 90 minutes with President Biden and President Putin. We know that President Biden brought in Secretary of State Antony Blinken. His Russian counterpart also in the room. The second round with slightly larger delegations from each country. President Putin.
Думаю, что нет необходимости вступительные слова какие-то долгие произносить. Тема примерно, наверное, всем известна. Стратегическая стабильность, кибербезопасность, региональные конфликты, торговые отношения. Да, еще говорили о сотрудничестве в Арктике. Ну вот примерный набор. Пожалуйста, прошу ваши вопросы.
Спасибо. Добрый вечер. Может быть, вы расскажете, какие темы вы обсуждали наиболее подробно? Вот, в частности, очень интересует украинская тематика. В каком контексте она затрагивалась? Обсуждалась ли ситуация на Донбассе? Обсуждалась ли возможность вступления Украины в НАТО? И еще перед переговорами большие ожидания были связаны с возвращением послов двух стран в столице. Вот, в частности, ваш помощник Юрий Викторович Ушаков говорил, что это возможно. Приняты ли такие решения? И как в целом прошли переговоры? Спасибо.
Да, что касается возвращения послов в места своей работы, в Москву, соответственно, американского посла, в Вашингтон российского, мы договорились о том, что этот вопрос решен. Они возвращаются на место к месту своей службы постоянной. Ну, когда конкретно, там, завтра, послезавтра, это вопрос.
When specifically it'll be tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, that's a mere technical issue. We've reached an agreement that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia and the U.S. State Department would begin consultations on the full range of interaction on the diplomatic track. There are many things that remain to be resolved, but both sides, including the Americans, are geared toward finding a solution. Turning now to Ukraine, yes, this issue was discussed. I can't say it was discussed in detail, but as far as I've understood President Biden, he agrees that the basis for a settlement in Ukraine, the basis needs to be the Minsk agreements. As for the entry by Ukraine into NATO, this issue was broached. That remains to be discussed. That is that's the general line. Question from Itar Tas.
Владимир Владимирович, вы сказали, что одна из тем была...
Mr. Putin, you said that one of the topics was strategic stability. Could you give us some more details about decisions, the decisions on this matter that Russia and the U.S. will be resuming, or will there be talks on strategic stability and disarmament, specifically regarding the START 3 treaty? Have you planned to start talks on its extension? Maybe there are some parameters or there are some new agreements to be signed? The United States and the Russian Federation have particular responsibility when it comes to strategic stability in the world. This is because we are the two largest nuclear powers, and we have the largest stockpiles of warheads and delivery systems based on the levels and based on the quality of modern nuclear weapons. We acknowledge this responsibility. I think it's clear for everyone the fact that President Biden has taken on responsibility and has taken the decision, which we believe is quite timely, to extend the START treaty for 5 years up until 2024. Of course, no doubt, the question remains on what happens next. We've reached an agreement that consultations will be commenced at the interagency level under the aegis of the State Department of the United States and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. Our colleagues at the working level will set out the composition of the delegations and the place where they'll be working and how frequently such meetings will take place. Please, let's give the floor to a foreign journalist, CNN.
Hi, Matthew Chance from CNN. Thank you very much for giving me this question. First of all, could you characterize the dynamic between yourself and President Biden? Was it hostile or was it friendly? And secondly, throughout these conversations, did you commit to ceasing carrying out cyber attacks on the United States? Did you commit to stopping threatening Ukraine's security? And did you commit to stop cracking down on the opposition in Russia?
Значит, первая общая оценка. Я считаю,
As for the first general appraisal, I think there was no hostility, quite the contrary. Our meeting took place, principally speaking, many of our positions, we don't share the same positions in many areas, but I think that both of these sides showed a willingness to understand one another and to find ways to bring our positions closer together. The talks were quite constructive. As for cybersecurity, we reached an agreement, chiefly that we will start negotiations on that. I think that's extremely important. Now, as for who needs to take on any sort of commitment, I'd like to inform you of something. I'm talking about something that's already well known, but not known to the broader public. Not from American sources. I'm afraid that I'll confuse the names of organizations, but as for American sources, they've said that most of the cyber attacks in the world are carried out from the cyber realm of the United States. In second place is Canada. Afterwards, Latin American countries, and then comes Great Britain. Russia on this list. Where's Russia on this list? Well, we are a country whose cyber territory has the most. Russia's not on the list. Number one. Secondly, we've received from the United States 10 requests regarding cyber attacks on attacks in the United States. As our colleagues have told us, they are from the cyber realm of Russia. And there were 2 requests this year. Both last year and this year, our colleagues have received exhaustive responses. For our part, Russia last year sent in accordance sent to the state structures of the U.S. over 40 and 35 this year, and we still haven't even received a single response on that front. This says that we do have something to work on. And the question of who, to what degree, needs to take on responsibility, that should be resolved during the negotiation process. We're going to start consultations. What we think is that when it comes to cybersecurity, cybersecurity is incredibly important in the world in general, and specifically for the United Nations, and it's also important for Russia to the same extent. I'll give you an example. We know that there were cyber attacks on a pipeline company in the United States. We also know that the company was compelled to pay $5 million to the blackmailers. Some of the money, I believe, has already been returned, according to my sources, which was paid electronically, but some of it has not been returned. And what do the state organs of Russia have to do with that? We are encountering the same threats. For example, when it comes to the healthcare system of one of the big regions of the Russian Federation. And we see that this work is being coordinated from the cyber realm of the United States. I don't think that the United States, that the official authorities have any interest in such types of manipulations. But I think just throwing out these insinuations at the expert level, that's inappropriate. We should sit and start working That's in the interest of the United States and the Russian Federation. In principle, we've reached agreement about that, and Russia's prepared to do it. Let's continue. RT.
RT. Дайте микрофон RT, пожалуйста.
RT, give the microphone to RT, please. Please give the microphone to some of the question not
Thank you very
answered.
much for coming back to me, sir. So there were two other parts of the question. The first one is, did you commit in these meetings to stop threatening Ukraine? Remember, the reason this summit was called in the first place, or the timing of it, was when Russia was building up lots of forces across the border from Ukraine. And the second part of the question, the third part of the question, was, did you commit to stopping your crackdown against the opposition groups inside Russia led by Alexei Navalny?
Значит, ну, я не слышал эту часть вопроса, или ее не перевели, или вы...
Well, I didn't hear that part of the question. Maybe it wasn't interpreted, or maybe you just decided to ask a second question. Let's turn now to commitments under the Ukraine. We only have one commitment, promoting the implementation of the Minsk agreements. If the Russian side is prepared to do it, then we will take that path without any doubt. Incidentally, I'd like to point out one point. Back in November of last year, what happened? The Ukrainian delegation submitted their considerations about how they are planning to implement the Minsk Accords. Please take a look. It's not a secret document. Here's what it says. Primarily, there's a need to have proposals for the political integration of Donbass into the Ukrainian legal system and constitution. To do that, there'll be a need for a constitutional amendment, as that's what it says, number one. And number two, the border between the Russian Federation and Ukraine along the line of Donbass will be occupied by the border forces of Ukraine on the day after the election. What did Ukraine propose as a first step? Returning the armed forces of Ukraine to their place of constant deployment. What does that mean? That means that the Ukrainian forces should go to Donbass. That's number one. The second thing that they proposed was closing the border between Russia and Ukraine in this area. And third, elections should be held in 3 months, and 3 months after these two steps are taken. You don't need to be an attorney. You don't need to have any special education to understand that that has nothing to do with the Minsk agreements. This runs fully counter to the Minsk agreements. That's why what additional commitments could Russia shoulder in this context? I think everything is understandable. Turning now to the exercises. We are conducting exercises on our own territory, just like the United States carries out exercises, a lot of exercises on their territory, but we didn't carry any exercises bringing our personnel and our equipment to the United States. Regrettably, the United States government is doing that right now. That's why the concerns should be not with Russia, but with the United States. But we talked about that during our talks. We clarified our positions. Turning now to the opposition and the citizen that you mentioned. Number one, this person knew that he was breaching the laws effective in Russia. He should have noted that as a person who was convicted 2 times. I'd like to underscore that he deliberately ignored the requirements of the laws. This person went abroad for treatment, and he didn't register with the authorities, and he came out of the hospital, and then he recorded a video, posting it in the internet. And then that requirement arrived. He didn't appear. He ignored the law, and he knew that he was then being investigated, and he came back deliberately. He did what he wanted to do. That's why. What can you say? As for people like him in the systemic opposition, regrettably, the format of the press conference does not allow for us to get into this in depth, but here's what I have to say. Look, I think I'm not going to say anything complicated. It's going to be clearly understandable.
сочтете возможным объективно донести это до ваших зрителей и слушателей,
If you can convey this objectively to your viewers, your audience, then I'll be very grateful to you.
объявили Россию своим
The United States has announced that Russia is its enemy, its adversary. The Congress did that in 2017. U.S. legislation has a provision. That provision says that the U.S. needs to support the rules and the order of democratic administration in our country, and it needs to support political organizations. That is enshrined in American law, the U.S. law. Now let's ask a question. If Russia is an enemy, then what organizations will support America in Russia? I don't think the ones that are strengthening the Russian Federation will do that. I think it's going to be those who are restraining it. And that is the objective of the United States, publicly stated objective. Organizing people who are promoting the implementation of Russian policy, or of American policy toward Russia, rather. And how should we feel about that? I think it's clear that we should be cautious about it. But we are going to act exclusively within the confines of Russian law.
Давайте, дайте Павлу Зарубину микрофон. А потом на RT вернемся. Все-таки.
Павел Зарубин,
Let's give Mr.
ВКПРК,
Rubin,
но вот я как раз хотел
we'll give
продолжить
Mr.
эту тематику.
Zarubin,
Мы
the microphone,
сейчас
then we'll
тоже все с вами
continue with
видели,
RT.
что с американской стороны постоянно
We
звучит
have heard that
риторика
the American side has constantly had some rhetoric about political prisoners in
Our
Russia.
political team continues to monitor this press conference with Vladimir Putin, Russia's president, following the summit with President Biden. He continues with his answers there from Russian television. Of course, he did take that question from an American organization. CNN was the organization that he chose, asking a number of questions about Alexei Navalny, the treatment of Alexei Navalny and opposition groups in Russia, also asking about Ukraine. There were questions about cyber attacks. There were a number of headlines. We want to unpack them for you. First of all, right at the very top there, the translator wasn't on during our coverage across the networks. And one of the things I want to point out is that Vladimir Putin said right off the top that both he and President Biden have agreed to return their ambassadors to their posts in a bid to lower tensions. So that would be one of these, as you call them, deliverables right out of the gate from this summit to try to ease tensions between the two countries. On cyber attacks, Vladimir Putin acknowledging that there will be what you'd call, I guess, working groups right after this summit where they will begin at slightly lower levels. And obviously these two presidents saying it's in Russia's interest and in the U.S. interest to work on these cyber attacks to make the world a safer place. He was somewhat defensive on cyber attacks, pointing out in his words that the U.S., Canada, Latin America are involved in cyber attacks of their own. He did reference the pipeline being attacked in the U.S. On Ukraine, he said, we do assemble on that border, but we're doing what's within the framework of what we're allowed to do, suggesting that the U.S. Does the same thing. The questioning does continue at this hour, but I do want to bring in our Chief Global Affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, watching this with me. Martha, what's your main takeaway?
Well, they certainly had a deliverable, as you say, having those ambassadors return to their posts. The Russian ambassador left the U.S. shortly after Joe Biden made that comment about killer, after the question George Stephanopoulos asked, and Joe Biden said, yeah, I think he's a killer, or acknowledged that he thought that way. And he will now come back. He hasn't been back since that comment. And the U.S. ambassador was asked to leave Moscow because of sanctions after Navalny, and because of sanctions after SolarWinds. So that is progress. The cyber security part of this, clearly, Vladimir Putin did not admit in any way that he had any part of anything.
In fact, quite the opposite, turning the tables.
Also, you know, right off the bat, they asked what the mood was in there, whether it was hostile. And Vladimir Putin said quite the contrary. So I think really from what we've heard, even from the Russian president, it sounds like the kind of exact progress they really wanted to make in this.
And on Alexei Navalny, of course, who Western intelligence believes was poisoned, carried out by Russian agents. He left the country to go seek treatment. Vladimir Putin saying in front of the world that he didn't register that treatment and then came back to Russia, that Navalny knew he was breaking the law. That's why he's been in prison, serving 2 years, if you will. They've just cracked down in recent days on opposition groups, including Navalny supporters. I took note that he did not use his name, which he never does.
Never does, yeah.
He's standing firm.
He's standing firm. And leading up to this summit, of course, he banned the opposition. It was clear what kind of stand he would take on that in this summit, and indeed he did.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.